Hi guys, it's Kata here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is gonna be a care guide on variegated adansonis. During my time of growing them, which has been a year and a little bit, I think I have grown over 200 plants, and I will be giving you a full guide, everything from cuttings, how to propagate, and how to generally care for these beauties. So first of all, I will tell you about the growing conditions that I have this in. My setup consists of a cheap greenhouse that I got from Aldi. You can also get it on Amazon if you want to get it there. It does a job, it's amazing what you get for those 20 euros, and I have 3, so that speaks. We've also made additional shelves because the original shelves that come with the greenhouse are kind of like wrecks, and I keep all of my adansonis in such pots and they just don't stand on them. So they are made from clear plastic and they have a lid just so if I spill any water or soil, it stays on there. It allows the light to come through the whole greenhouse. The only con to this is that there is a little lack of airflow, but I haven't had any issues with it, so I think we're good. Recent addition was a self-watering system, which was worth every penny. I think we paid, it was around 35 euros, and I can just plug in and they all get watered. Before that, I would take each and every adansoni out and spray it with a water bottle. During colder months, we supplement the light with grow light. These sit in front of an east-facing window, so they do get bright direct light up until noon, and afterwards it's bright indirect light. But during winter, I still supplement light. We currently have 2 grow lights, and I think we're gonna need to change the setup a little bit. It can be from few hours to even, well, during like the darkest time. Fertilizer is via osmicode. I will touch on that a little more later on. So the growth rate that I currently have is approximately 1 week for a new leaf on already established plant. For a cutting to grow a new leaf, it usually takes 2 to 3 weeks. Depends how much roots it had before. And to root a cutting to this, what I call soil ready, it's usually about 2 to 3 weeks. So yeah, that's a little information on my setup and how I grow them, and now we're gonna go into the proper guide. Starting off with how much light do these variegated adansonis need, and my simple answer to that is as much as you can possibly provide them. They are lighthouse and they're not afraid to show you that. That means direct sun blasting on them, and also grow lights. They don't mind, they'll be like, perfect. A common question that gets asked in the plant community is, does the light affect the variegation? Higher light intensity does not affect how much variegation will your plant have. It will affect type of variegation. So hear me out. I have categorized the types of variegation I have in 3. We have silky white, we have minty, and then we have like yellowish. So silky white is the most desirable one just because of high contrast from green to white. This is what I consider silky white type of variegation. There are no minty parts and it just stays white even after a while. In my experience, this type of variegation usually comes whenever you have your adansonis growing under grow lights, because during winter all of my adansonis had that type of variegation, but now during summer when we've not used any of the grow lights, they've kinda went minty-ish. So if you want that, in my personal experience, you'll have to supplement it with grow lights. Second type of variegation is minty, which I've already mentioned. This is a good example of minty, and it gets even worse. I also call this minty. So this is actually a highly variegated top cuttings. After a while, they just get like really, they practically almost look like your basic adansoni, which is not what I want because I know that buyers won't like that as well. I've noticed that this happened whenever we stopped using grow lights and the plants had to get adjusted to sunlight. They were protesting a little bit, and I've noticed that it also happens a lot whenever you have a older plant. So let's take this for example. You can see that the newer leaves are highly variegated, and then the bottom is kind of like looking like your normal adansoni. The issue that arises from this is the variegation on the stem will also be very harder to see, and then you can even less predict the type of variegation the cutting will have. And then the third type of variegation is the yellowish. So whenever the plants have accustomed to the natural sunlight, they were kind of turning yellowish and they look like Oreos. I think this is a good example. You can see this is a silky white variegation. variegation, and then these new leaves are they have a yellowish tone to them, but they're still looking fairly white. And this is kind of the type of variegation that I've been rocking recently. Usually the newer leaves will be slightly more whitish and then they will fade to yellowish. These three types of variegation, they all came from the same plant, so it's not like this is not an Aurea, this is still your classical variegated adansonii. The next topic is humidity. So how much humidity do these guys need? They don't really need it, such as like anthuriums, because those will very actively show you that they dislike being in 30% of humidity. But these guys will usually be fine in lower humidity. However, growth rate will be slower, the newer leaves will have harder time unfurling and they can also get stuck, and they will also be smaller. Plants will also produce less aerial roots, which is not best because I appreciate aerial roots for rooting cuttings. So this is something to keep in mind. The plant will grow just fine, but it's the same situation as with light. I recommend that you get them as much humidity as you possibly can. Again, I am having a growth rate of 1 leaf per week in high humidity, so I think it really pays off. Whenever you have higher humidity, the water will be also evaporating less, so you have to water less, which is also good. Next one is the temperature. I found that they are not as sensitive to cold, but then again, I've never really had them on like strictly cold. I've always used a heat mat or at least some sort of isolation during the colder months. They really appreciate warmth, not as much in the air, but more in soil media, because if the soil media is optimal temperature for root growth, it's around 24 degrees, 23, 22, somewhere around there. So if you keep your soil media to the optimal root growth temperature, you will obviously get very nice roots, and the plant will be also growing faster. They grow really fast for me in the summer, so the plant could be unfurling a new leaf and that leaf hasn't even unfurled fully and it's already pushing out a new leaf, so that's what I'm talking about. Another common question that gets asked a lot is, will higher temperature melt the leaves? And I personally have not had that happen, even though the greenhouse has on some occasions gotten really hot, but none of the leaves have melted. So I think the leaf melting, so this is something in lines of that. It's a combination of water and light. Next on, we're gonna be talking about watering. So watering really depends on numerous of factors, which are what kind of soil do you have, what are the temperatures, what are the humidity, how established is the plant, and so on. Overall, in my experience, these plants can handle a little bit of underwatering and a little bit of overwatering. Both extremes are not good for longer periods of time, even though in my personal experience, they handle underwatering better than overwatering. If the soil will be staying wet for too long, what you will experience, given the fact that you don't supplement enough light, is variegation browning. You can also get root rot, which, you know, leads to many of the issues. If the soil will be staying dry for too long, the plant won't suffer as much. Some of the roots can dry up, so the little hairs that they have on the roots, those can dry up, and it's through them that the plant is actually uptaking water, so it can cause severe dehydration to the plant. But like mild underwatering signs are harder unfurling new leaves and just slowed growth. So my watering schedule really depends. I usually kind of let them dry out a little bit in between, and then I just press the button and everyone gets watered. And now we're gonna be talking about fertilizing. These guys grow really fast, and whenever you have a fast growing plant, you will also have to supplement the fertilizer, because without those nutrients, the plant will start to suffer sooner or later. So the only type of fertilizer that I actually use on this plant is Osmicote. I mix some in my soil mix and I also sprinkle some on top, and it has worked well and I don't have any issues. The reason why I'm using this is because I have pots with no drainage. Whenever I am fertilizing something, I kind of like to see it flow through. If it were to happen that I over fertilize, I can't really wash out the soil, so I'm kind of avoiding all of that. So if you're not fertilizing, the plant can slow down on its growth, even though with adansoniis it's less noticeable. Some of the older leaves can yellow and drop. That's all that I've seen. I haven't really had any serious issues for under fertilizing, even though there was a period of time where I didn't do much of that, so I still made it. Next on the soil for these plants. During my time of growing them, I have gone through different phases in my soil mixes and they have tested it all. But all the soil mixes have these three in common, so it's perlite, fine bark and osmic coat. These are my base. In the beginning I was using a lot of tree fern fiber, but the thing got really hard to get and expensive, so I've moved to cheaper alternatives. Now I've been using like regular plant soil, potting soil. The latest batch I have tried some, it had mixed plant soil and some coconut coir, so we're gonna see how that is gonna go. You should adjust the soil to your growing conditions and your watering schedule and humidity and all that. What you should be opting is for a well-draining soil. I found that they don't really mind having slightly more compact but not like fully dense soil. And some additional info about adansonis. They are climbing species, and as you may have noticed, none of them have support because A, I'm too lazy to give them such short moss poles, B, we kind of cut them at this point. This will be cut in a week, and we don't also have as much vertical space in the greenhouse. But if you can, and if you want to see like this size leaves, you should definitely give them a moss pole, or even just a stick works. And if you're looking to getting a variegated adansonii, I would highly recommend that you get a somewhat already established plant that's growing, and you can kind of see what type of variegation will that plant have, because they are very temperamental with nodes and with cuttings, and I'm still at a point where I haven't figured them out. Still can't with certainty predict the variegation. It's a lottery, and whenever somebody says that you can predict it, you can't. So the next portion of the video will be focusing on cuttings. If it were philodendrons or such, I would highly recommend that you air layer them whenever you propagate them, just because it makes propagating easier. But these guys are so easy to root. I've not gone down that road, like maybe in the beginning. The problem with this is that they are growing so fast that you cannot ever air layer the top cutting, like ever. You can't. Example, so those two top leaves have just recently sprouted the new roots, which you can see here, but it's already making a new leaf. So the top cutting will never be air layered. At least I haven't had that happen yet. Here in the pot we have two top cuttings, which were both cut without any aerial roots. Whenever I've cut top cuttings, even if they had some aerial roots, I have had 100% rate of rotted new leaves inside of petiolate sheet. So the new leaf that would originally come out of this top cuttings rotted in the sheet, and they have to regrow it. So this is something that you may want to keep in mind if you are getting a top cutting. They will grow a new shoot, so they won't activate a new node. There is a leaf inside of a petiolate sheet inside of a petiolate sheet. Okay, so that's it for the top cuttings, and I am always rooting my plants in water. That should have been changed. There are some algae here and there, but so water propagation is my preferred way to do it. Constant water exposure really helps to form new roots faster, especially if you have some aerial roots that have dried. Those will sprout faster in my experience if you're using water. The roots are always exposed to a lot of oxygen, which also boosts the root growth. And funny thing about water propagation is if you are rooting several cuttings in one jar, plants that are already rooting are releasing growth hormones into the water, and whenever you put more cuttings in the same pot, they root faster.
Nice.
And this is why I am always rooting many cuttings in one pot. There are only a few left just because I went on a repotting craze yesterday. So the other propagation methods such as moss work well as well. I used to do that in the beginning, but it's really time consuming to get all the roots out of the moss. It also takes a lot of space, so this is just space efficient and easy. With moss you have to be more careful that it doesn't dry out. And then other methods such as perlite, I think it's really similar to water, kind of, with a little bit more air, I guess. And another common question that I get is when to pot them up. How I go about this is whenever you have a cutting, so make sure that the new roots are at least few centimeters long. In this case you have many aerial roots that have grown, and usually if there is just one aerial root, the roots will branch. So it's either a few centimeters long or branched roots. Like this is something that could have been potted a week or two ago, but this is still good. As you can see, it's already pushing out a new leaf. But I was potting these boys yesterday and they had the amount of roots like that. But this is something that I would consider to be ideal to whenever you're potting it up. You can also pot them earlier if you have a need, but in that case you must be sure to keep the substrate slightly more moist, wetter. So these plants are used to a very high percentage of water, which is practically 100%. I found that keeping the substrate slightly more damper, wetter, it helps the root formation. So whenever you are potting them up, I don't use any special media. All of my plants get the same media. I use orchid bark, perlite, osmicote, and now I'm trying out a little bit of potting soil and coconut coir. And the next segment is gonna be about propagation. Propagating adansoniis is very easy. I kind of get my propagation urge from propagating these. Really good, you can cut them up almost every week. They propagate just as easily as variegated monstera, sometimes even easier. Be sure that you're always using sharp and sterile equipment. And whenever you are cutting, you should be cutting in between the nodes. Adansoniis kind of grow very self-explanatory. Just cut in between when there is space. You won't be cutting into any node just because they have new auxiliary bud is actually hidden behind a petiolar sheets. So if we take those two leaves, for example, so the top one is originally facing on the right side, and if you look at the stem, you can see there are already some active aerial roots. But for this specific example, the new leaf will come out on this side, which is so the outer side of the stem. You can kind of see maybe there is a new bud right here. You can also check for the variegation, but then again, that can be really sketchy. If we take a look at this leaf, which is originally on the left side of the plant, the new leaf will come out from this side. You can see there is a little bump here. It's on the side that has less petiolar sheet. Does that make sense? Because here it's kind of like whoop, and here it goes a little further. And then one more note on variegation. Variegation is really unpredictable with these. Even if you have a node that's like strictly half moon, you can either get like fully green, fully white, or maybe if you're lucky, something in between. So if you have an option, get a plant that has more candy cane type of variegation. If you can, I have tried to specifically breed more of these splashy type of adansoniis, but I haven't had the luck just because the half moon variegation is so strong that it always comes back somehow. Still working on that, I'm not giving up yet. So yeah, I think this concludes our hefty care guide for variegated adansoniis. Hopefully you found it useful. Hopefully this will answer some of your questions about it. Let me know if you have more in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and hit the notification button, and I'll see you next time. Bye!